Space-time does not exist on the surfaces of black holes. Space-time, or the fabric of space-time, time continuums, arrow of time, all of those things are confined to the recursive interiors. So all physical, what's referred to as physical phenomena, we're coming to understand that this term physical really needs to be broadened. This mass mentality that's been profuse throughout physics over the last century needs to be amended or refined to absorb and to reflect the actual reality that what's physical, what we determine as physical or mass, it really is just an expression of holographic information. Just a second. So all physical phenomenon, so-called physical phenomenon, are a product of and are derived from the probability, again related to the uncertainty principle, that an isolated reflective medium, and right now I've actually kind of geared the conversation and made subtle points indicating that these reflective surfaces represent the candidate or the dark matter medium that physics has been trying to really discern what it really is. So all physical phenomenon is derived from the probability that an isolated reflective dark matter medium, 1, mirror to the right, can come into relativity to another or other dark matter reflected vectors, 2, second mirror to the left, and thus allow information, which at this point we'll define information as physical observable measurable quantities or points. So the relativity of these two dark matter reflective surfaces allow information to be recursively holographically extended, or as represented holographically prime on their informational screens or the surfaces of black holes, which we refer to as manifolds. So this probability or potential for two relative dark matter planes to come into relativity to each other can be equated to the uncertainty principle. And I've made these comparisons in former videos. So this probability or uncertainty principle is also expressed via the powers of observation. As it is, the surface of our eye represents a reflective surface. And I'm going to extend that and draw that description in as the surface of the eye, or the functionality, the mechanism of the eye, represents a dark matter medium with a dark matter reflective surface. So the surface of our eye, as it represents a reflective surface, can potentially, and does myriads of times, in many instances, can come into relativity to other reflective surfaces. So perhaps we can infer that the eye is both a reflective and a recursive mechanism, whereby information, once colliding with the surface, like photon, of the eye is recursively represented to the brain, and the brain interprets it. We can go even further and infer that the eye receives layers, as in the recursion, layers, still images, slices of reflected information, and we equate these to the membranes of recursion, and the information is sent or received by the eye in tiny stages, still frames. And then we could say that the brain, in some sense, collaborating with and working in synchronization with the information that the eye is receiving, that the brain can represent a movie projector that speeds these frames up and brings about the cognizance of speed, motion, and ultimately time. And of course we'll get into consciousness and things like that in later videos. So the quantum reality, which is the real object or energy light between the mirrors, represents a zero-dimensional point. All other points, whether on the surface of the manifolds or recursively infinitely expressed into their virtual interiors, are one-dimensional points. In other words, the one-dimensional point on the surface is no different from each slide of recursion. It's one-dimensional points. However, the difference is the one-dimensional points on the surface are compacted and represent a light sphere. Whenever it goes into recursion, and we have the phase space in a virtual timeline and the three-dimensional aspects that emerge into the system, that's what makes it appear like it's three-dimensional. It's still individual slices or layers. When combined together and in motion, the motion or the movement forward and back, all of those aspects existing in the virtual interior are defining the three-dimensional fabric of space-time, separate from but derived from the one-dimensional volume of information on the surface. Let me check my time. So remember, the information points on the surfaces of the topological states, or the manifolds of information, these black hole points, or these black hole volumes or light rings on the M field, exists on one-dimensional surface. As well, all other recursive expressions of supersymmetric system of symmetric points from this volume of information, these recursive expressions of this information on the surface represent membrane points, M points. So these recursive points spanning the whole string, they have no real thickness. Each individual layer has no real thickness. In that sense, it's not separated from the fact that the information on the surface is a one-dimensional, no thickness. The same exists on each point of the recursion, spanning the whole string. So these recursive points as derived from the surface are merely propagating, virtually propagating, the same one-dimensional volume of information that dwells on the surface. The membranes, therefore, are also one-dimensional and merely reflect a thin veneer of information on their frames infinitely. So it's the virtual timeline that exists that seems to extend the information in a way that bespeaks the perception of depth or length. Now, however, all recursive points in the matrices represents the same points on the surface. They're the same thing. You have a symmetry on the surface, and then M1 symmetry, M2 symmetry, M3 symmetry, M4 symmetry. You have individual distinct symmetries asserted where the membranes appear, but all of those recursive points considered together represent a supersymmetric recursive representation of a symmetry on the surface. So the three-dimensional aspects of mass are derived from the full sum of layers or membranes existing in the matrices. All mass points in the recursive space represent the full sum of the mass object or points that, if added or placed together, form the whole three-dimensional object. In other words, if I have an apple, a quantum apple existing between two planes, and this quantum apple is sliced and represented not only on the surface but sliced infinitely down, then what I'm saying is the apple itself that we see as a three-dimensional object is actually, when we look at this apple, the information of that apple is actually extending infinitely, either away from us or being derived infinitely in slices to our point of view from the surface. So three-dimension is actually the whole sum of our ability to look through these membranes and see individual slices. So the apple we think exists right in front of us, but that apple is actually, in essence, a string itself. Every mass object we look at is a string. We have a surface, and we can only see the surface, and we can't see the information behind it. And once we go around it, then we can't see the information here. So long as we can't see the information behind it, it blocks our view. If you're looking at an apple and you see a tree behind it, the closer you put that apple, that tree disappears. So what I'm saying is that all mass objects, no matter if they look like they're in, and if we're describing the matrix here, and everything that exists inside is actually being gradually produced through layers to where this point is, and if all things in the matrix exist that way, then every object of mass that we see actually is being extended in slices from the surface. So all points in the matrix extend from or emerge from the surface, no matter how far they extend down the virtual timeline. So in essence, we're comprised of individual slices that extend all the way to the surface, which was the beginning of the system, the first emergence of our mass holographic existence, of the event horizon. one way it extends, and as well